we'll have our principal, Miss Patricia Angoy, say a few words for that, and along with that, we'll have her introduce our alum.
Thank you so much, Tamara. It's a real honor for me to be here with all our illustrious alumni this afternoon on a Sunday during a weekend that we're celebrating United World College's Day, and there have been lots of activities on the campus. Well, thank you very much, Yeye, Tamara, and Liam, our hosts for today on A Race Through Time, the legacy of student activism at Waterford, Kamhlaba. What an interesting title for us to interrogate this weekend, and I look forward to hearing more about the many forms of student activism that took place at Waterford, Kamhlaba over the last 6 decades, although I know that you don't all represent the 6 decades. What issues, I wonder, remain important, as important as they were in the days when you were students here, and why are these issues still important? Waterford has lived through more than 2 generations of students and enters its 3rd. The grandchildren of alumni who were here in 1963 can now be part of Waterford today. I wonder what the battles are that we're still fighting, which have been won only to be replaced by others, for our students to engage in, to be active and create solutions for, and to take with them in their lives beyond the college, beyond Waterford, Kamhlaba, beyond further education, and into their everyday working lives. I look forward to hearing your stories and learning from you. Thank you, Mandy. Thank you, Duma. Thank you, Alana. And thank you, Banele, for being part of this afternoon's generational speakers. Thank you very much. And thanks, Tamara, for introducing me.
Thank you so much, Ms. Angoy. So our first speaker for today is Mandy Mzimba. I don't want to steal the show from her, so I'll have her introduce herself and tell us about her experience at Waterford and what it means to be a WK alum, knowing that it was the first multiracial school community in Southern Africa.
Thanks, Tamara. Hello, everybody. I was at Waterford and finished my A-levels in 1976. As most of you will know, 1976 was the year of the June 16 riots, student riots. And at that time, that certainly lit a spark amongst all of us, including those of us who were at Waterford. At the time, I was actually part head of school together with Rocky Habedi and Mark McLennan. And we decided that we wanted to join in the protest against apartheid at the time rather than racism. And we actually wanted to organize a march. So we took ourselves down to the police station like good citizens and respectful students to ask for permission to march, which was vehemently denied. And the police came down really rather hard on us. So we were not able to march. But the noticing and the awareness and the consciousness of that injustice was far higher from that time onwards. And in fact, it created, first of all, a pipeline into the ANC, but also a lifelong understanding and awareness of social justice issues amongst most of us. Thanks, Tamara.
Thank you so much, Mandy. I actually think that was really brave of you as a student to decide that you really wanted to march down and I guess, fight for justice. Our next alum is Alana. I guess we'll have you introduce yourself and also tell us what it means to be a WK alum.
Thanks so much, Tamara, for that introduction. And also thank you to everyone for having me here. I'm so honored to be a part of this conversation. I was at Waterford from 1994 until 1997. I finished my, it was O-levels. I can't remember if it was O-levels or the first time we had IGCSE at Waterford. And I think, you know, starting in 1994, that was kind of when you know, Nelson Mandela was elected as the first Black president of South Africa. And, you know, in theory, it was the end of apartheid. But as we know, the legacies of apartheid continue until today. And I think it was an interesting time to be at Waterford because I think a lot of the consciousness of the anti-apartheid movement was with us all. But, you know, we did not, at least I did not go down to, you know, we didn't think about marching and protesting necessarily. But I do think those values of the school have influenced my career and my decisions to kind of engage in social justice issues that were relevant to the way I grew up. So for example, I decided to start my career fighting for treatment for people living with HIV in Africa. So, and I think that's very much because that was the injustice of my lifetime. I was born in 1980. I grew up in Southern Africa. Many people were getting HIV. So that was an important issue that was important to me. And now I've kind of transitioned out of public health and I work at the Africa Center in New York City. And that's really, the mission of the Africa Center is really to center people of African descent because we have not been centered in anything in the world, and really to make sure that we're the ones telling our stories and to make sure that we're transforming narratives and creating new narratives about people of African descent and bringing people of African descent together. Because I think, you know, we're often divided and separate, but there's beauty. The anti-apartheid movement, for example, was able to function because of Pan-Africanism and because of the work of so many people around the world supporting South Africans in the apartheid movement. So I think, just to summarize, for me, Waterford was really not necessarily my action at the school at the time, but really more what I took from that consciousness into my career and my life.
Thank you so much, Alana. Apologies from Aye, who's trying to connect, but we're having a few technical issues, but I guess we'll still move on. Our next alum is Duma. Nice seeing you today. Would you like to, you know, tell us about yourself and also what being a WK student meant to you at the time and what it means now?
Thank you, Tamara. I just have to say that my going to Waterford was a political act on behalf of my that my parents took. So when they got married, they decided that none of their children would go through Bantu education, and they decided to save up for the day when their children would. So that's what they decided to do. So I arrived at Waterford at the age of 11. I was. A few months later, I was in that meeting that Mandy was talking about, and we were just new, and we didn't really know what was going on, and the older students, like Rocky as well, were sort of deciding what to do. But it was a formative experience for me, and I just have to say that we had a very inspirational teacher called Gunvant Coventry, who basically politicized a lot of us generations of Waterford students, and including myself. And there were funny things that happened. I joined an ANC cell in my later years when I was in when I was at Esiveni, and my friends were Gandhi Maseko. He had left the country at the age of 1 when his parents walked across the border into exile, and with a 1-year-old child. And my other friends, so my other friend was in Peti Morojele. Andy Foos here joined us in the 3rd year at, I think, what's the middle school? Yeah, I can't remember what the hostel was called. But when I joined this ANC cell, we became very active in the ANC, and I would go on plane with ANC literature to Durban, where I would distribute it with other people. So by the time I was going to leave Waterford in 1980, it was clear that I would be arrested. So my friends spent about 2 weeks with me and comforting me, giving me strength to go back and face the enemy. And I was arrested at the airport in Durban. And it was a huge news. It was debated in the apartheid parliament. And the opposition, the DA of the time, called for this child to be released, and I was released. But over the next couple of years, I was back in detention twice. I had 2 treason trials. The second treason, so I spent about 9 months in solitary confinement, and I had 2 treason trials that lasted many months. And the second treason trial, I got a suspended sentence, and I went to study in the UK. I studied economics. So I just want to say, for me, Waterford was a life-changing experience. And I was talking to Rocky earlier on, is that we tend to romanticize our experience at Waterford. But for me, I did say that I felt like it was the only place in the world that I've been to where I did not experience racism. But Rocky asked me to check myself. And, at the end of the day, this school did not appoint a woman or a Black person or a person of color as a principal for more than 5 decades. And they also, in our group, our Waterford group, a lot of people said that though a lot of people at Waterford struggled, they felt this thing to perform a lot. And I actually didn't feel that way. I didn't feel pressure to perform, but a lot of people apparently hated it for that reason. But what I found from my experience at Waterford was that I found it difficult, and many people have said the same, to adapt to life outside Waterford. We were up in the hill, and it was a kind of an artificial bubble. And when I went home on holidays, I remember I went to the cinema once. I wanted to watch a movie. I think it was Kramer versus Kramer, and they refused me entrance, and that made me not want to go back to South Africa. So I spent most of my holidays at the Maseko family in Malkerns. So I don't know, it became very difficult to adjust to life in apartheid South Africa, having grown up there. And finally, it gave me an international perspective, having been at Waterford. And I really have passion for I hate the xenophobia that has gone out of control in South Africa. There were so many people at Waterford from different African countries, from 50 countries throughout the world. And I had this international perspective since then to everything I do. And I'm proud. I call myself an African first and a South African second, and I don't identify with any ethnic group in South Africa. That's the final thing. And then the second thing I want to say is that I've become, in South Africa, quite well known as an activist for pro-poor economic policies. Issues of climate justice are very important. And I think the school was about activism, but the issues have been changing every single decade. For now, there's issues of gender inequality, wealth inequalities, climate justice. And these are all the issues that I'm grappling with in my work in South Africa as an economic activist for a better South Africa, because our country, last thing I would like to say, has failed dismally to transform its economy. And those are the things that I'm grappling with. And I learned about those things in Waterford. I was a very bad debater, but there was a debating club which I tried to enter. I think nowadays I've become a better debater than I was at Waterford. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Duma. That is very inspiring, actually, and I'm just super amazed by how far, what you're able to learn from your experience at Waterford, and I guess the impact it has on your life right now. Our next panelist is not an alum, a current student. He's a current student at Waterford. His name is Liam. And I'll also let him introduce himself and tell us about his experience at Waterford and what it means to him, what being a WK student means to him right now, even as he finishes.
Hi, yeah, I'm still finishing, so I don't really have the same rich or stored experiences as, some of the other panelists do. But it's kind of inspiring because that was part of the reason I did want to come to Waterford. I heard about, the real advocacy for social change, and I've felt it a bit in the community with the students. We are definitely very socially aware, and we are trying to really make a difference in the world, like some of you panelists have. And yeah, growing in this environment, trying to learn from the past and also trying to learn ourselves has been very interesting, and I hope that at the end of the experience I can come out with some of the same experiences that other panelists have also, you know, have had, that would be ideal for me. But yeah, as of right now, we're taking it a day at a time, seeing what we can learn about ourselves and the world. And it is very much an eye-opening experience. Thank you, Tamara.
Thank you, Liam. I guess as a classmate, I can also agree on that because I also came here to learn more about being an African and what it means to be in the position we're in right now. So our last panelist is Banele. I guess you have seen how we're doing this. You can introduce yourself and, you know, tell us about your experience at Waterford.
Thank you very much, Tamara. It's quite an honor being here and being part of the panelists with these great alums sharing these wonderful stories about the transformation that is happening up here at Waterford. I was one of the people who first had a wrong impression about the school. The way I got to learn about the school, I was in a debate and I shared a false claim about the school where I was called to order by my opponents. And then I came up here to actually learn more about the school. And my first encounter in the school, I met Brian Smith, who gave me a tour of the school. And it was the first time I had a conversation with a white person. And it was a transformation for me because it was a conversation where I realized care and understanding. And I thought this is a place that I want my education to be in. And so my story and about coming and applying here is a story around a transformation because also coming from a family that is of low economic background, it is also a time about opportunity. So being able to come here and have so many opportunities where I learn with people from different places, where we've got access to music, to sports, and especially to intellect of the people and the staff members. I was involved in everything I could get my hands on when I was here. And during our time in terms of activism, it wasn't as well as it was happening in 97 or in 76, but we still held on into remembering the key events that happened in South Africa, especially around June 16. During my time at Waterford, the week of June 16 was a week where we had the film week, where we watched all the films that are talking about apartheid in South Africa. And we had debates, we had open forums, we had discussions, we had even writing of open letters. And those instilled values in me about really working towards positive change. Even though we're in the 2000s and it was the start of social media, it was an opening platform of us sharing about our own opinions as well. And so that's my experience at Waterford. Thanks, Tamara.
Thank you so much, Banele. I think I have to agree on that because I remember I've been here since last year. I came in IB1, and the extracurricular activities in Waterford is more than extracurricular. I guess I can say that because it's very involving, and I love how it also prepares you for life after Waterford. So back to Mandy. What do you wish? What do you wish current students at Waterford got to experience that you experienced? And what would you tell the current generation? What advice would you give to the current generation of Waterford?
I'm not sure I can be so presumptuous as to give the current generation advice, but I can start from what you and Liam said to say you don't probably appreciate how proud we are to see you have that consciousness, to see you have that activism, to see you take your place in society as people who are aware of what social injustice looks like, and you push back against it. It actually validates our entire history, as it were, because we became adults at Waterford. And so we have walked a path that was formulated by Waterford, and there you are walking that path in your different ways with your different agendas, but still walking a path for justice in the end. And I'm very proud of that. What would I say is that the project is probably much bigger than we realized, certainly bigger than I realized in 1976. It has evolved into a project fundamentally, I believe, of dismantling white supremacy, of making sure that inherited privilege is not a gatekeeper in anybody's life. So it means we have an opportunity to actually reap the benefits of everybody's value, of everybody's best self. And I think if I say anything that is advice, it would be to be your very best self, because simply by doing that, you dismantle a narrative that is very damaging. Thanks, Tamara.
Thank you so much, Manju. Thank you. Our co-host Aye is here with us. I don't know if he can speak. Okay, I guess we'll go on to Alana. What do you wish, what would you tell the current generation of Waterford? And I guess what do you wish what type of, I guess, energy do you wish the current generation of Waterford had that maybe you had and we currently don't have?
So yeah, thank you so much, Tamara. I actually want to echo what Mandy said, because I actually think that I wish I had your energy and your consciousness when I was at Waterford, because I think that, you know, I'm not sure that we were as critical and as active in ways that were representative of the time that you are now. I mean, when I was doing the prep call with you, I heard about a Black consciousness group. You know, when I was at Waterford, we didn't even really talk about race, which is unfortunate, you know. And then just hearing Benele, you know, when I was at Waterford, we also didn't talk about class, which is highly problematic because, you know, there were a lot of privileged people, including myself, who went to Waterford. My mom worked for the UN, but there was many people who were there on bursaries and scholarships. And at the time I was there at 1994, there was a bunch of refugees that came from Rwanda and Burundi. And you know, we didn't even really talk about that. You know, we just kind of were in, you know, an imaginary world where we didn't really talk about the differences that exist among different types of people. We didn't talk about, you know, prejudice, you know, the xenophobia that happens amongst Africans, you know, and we didn't talk about the many revolutionaries that exist across the African continent. We didn't learn the history of many different African people on the continent and in diaspora. So I think that, you know, the push that I hear about Waterford students now is really, it's really more like, I wish that you guys were teaching me when I was at Waterford what to pay attention to, how to transition from focusing on the, you know, on apartheid to thinking about how do you really continue that struggle in a way that made sense at the time that I went to Waterford. So I guess my answer is I all the time feel like I learn from young people, because I always, you know, right now the activism in the world, it's really run by younger people. It's not people who are my age. I'm 40. It's not 40-year-olds who are running activism. It's really young people. So I think that I have a lot to learn from you, and I'm just so inspired by you all and calling things out. Yeah, I totally agree. It's atrocious that it's 2021 and it's the first Black and woman principal at Waterford. I mean, that's atrocious. So you know, and you guys are a part of making that happen. So yeah, I'll stop there, but I have a lot to continue to learn from young people, and I'm so proud and inspired by all of you.
Thank you so much, Alana. Duma, what would you say in response to that question?
You know, that's a difficult question. I just have to tell a quick story. You know, a few years ago, I decided that I was obsessed that my son has to come to Waterford. So we went and did the test in 2013. I felt like he must go to high school at Waterford. And he just didn't want to go. You see, his mom had been living he was a diplomat, and she had been living in Poland. And he just felt like, why I'm coming back and you want to dump me elsewhere. So me having a political background and his mom being a politician, I was staying with him now. And I decided to go to the other extreme where I kept him away from the politics and allowed him to have his own mind. I think it went to a bit of an extreme, but I think I really appreciate the way he's turned out at the moment. But it's completely different from him. And he was politicized by the George Floyd incident last year. I thought he was lagging in terms of the political consciousness, but I felt that my childhood had been robbed. At 15, I was in prison. At 16, I was in prison again. And I just felt I wanted to live a normal life when I got to the UK. And I felt that my child, the same thing he should do. He should try to be a child as much as possible. Now, the second thing I want to say is that in the work I do, I just find it so amazing how the point of reference is what happens in the West. And if I want to give advice, is that the point of reference shouldn't be what happens in the West. In terms of economic policy, when I went to my Western university, it was about what happens in the US, in the UK. I had to relearn what happens in the developing countries by myself. What happens in Asia, what happens in Africa, what happens in Latin America and the global South. Even now with the COVID response, we are mimicking what happens in the West. And if I had to give some advice to you, I would say you must seek out partnerships, not just with America, but with Asia, with Latin America, with other Africans. I want to see Waterford students go to other universities and not just in America. And I feel strongly about it because I think it's corrupted many areas of academic inquiry. And people just don't want to look that there's solutions to our problems as developing countries outside of the framework that happened in the West. That's my advice to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Duma. Banela, what would you like to say about what our current generation, what we do and what you wish we did?
It's so wonderful learning from my co-panelists these wonderful stories, and we all have different experiences. And to add on to what they have shared, I think one of the things which I'll draw in during my experience here at Waterford is that we had this publication called The Ink on Fire. And with this publication, people would share their different opinions about different aspects. And some of the things which they shared really did sensitize my thinking and opened up the way I took decisions and I acted in my community and everywhere else. And one of the things I remember, Dalumuzi shared an opinion around how there's 7 billion people in the world, but I might be wrong with the number, but in terms of people being individuals, there's quite a few. People actually doing what they want to do, there are quite a few. Everyone is trying to mimic what the celebrities are doing. We're taking guidance from how to look like from models. We're taking how to act as an athlete from the most famous athletes, but we're not actually living our own lives and sharing our own lives and showing our true self. And we need to be liberated from that. And another piece was shared by, I think, Spusiso Gunene, where he was shared about that. Slavery was almost complete, but then slavery in terms of poverty in Africa is still vast. So we are still chained. And what I can share in terms of advice is that Waterford education trains you to think about and interrupt your education in terms of how do you know what you know? Question it. Place of reference, question it. Because most of our education is framed maybe to promote white supremacies or maybe to celebrate and conserve the privileges. But we need to question it, use the TOK lessons that you do get and actually apply about what is the truth and how do we get the truth. And as long as we question it, it's a good source in which you can actually get to know your own voice and then exercise your own voice. Thanks, Tamara, sorry.
Thank you so much. I find it interesting how you managed to connect us to TOK, given that we're IB students. So the next panelist will be Liam. I guess you can't speak about WK, the past generations of WK. So my question to you is, what values do you think, what values do you know about the past that you wish your classmates and your schoolmates had today?
Well, to begin, I feel like we do need a bit more of the fire that you guys had. I mean, although you say we're a bit more aware about these things, that we're coming forward and now being activists, I feel like there's a certain energy missing from, you know, the general student body. It's very little and, you know, far between the activism and, you know, within the forms in IB. It's just not something that's really talked about as much. Like Alana was referring to, that people weren't really having conversations about certain things, and for the most part, people still aren't having conversations about a lot of things that we need to be having conversations about. And I think Duma referred to like people really being violent and going and getting arrested and that kind of thing. But not to say that we need that level of, you know, going out and getting arrested, but like we do need that certain energy. I mean, we need the awareness that you guys kind of had. We need a kind of passion for these things that, as I do feel as a student, that I've noticed it in the vast majority of the student body. It's really, I don't want to say like numbers or that kind of thing, but like it's very few of us who are very passionate about things that we should really all be passionate about, being members of Waterford and with the history and knowing that, knowing who we are as a school. And it really is a bit, you know, disheartening to see that it's very few students who generally want to talk about these things, very few students who want to come up and do a panel like this that Tamara and AA have organized. It's very sad that the truth of the matter is right now, we just don't have that kind of widespread activism, I'd say. It's concentrated, especially in the IBs, and it's something that we need to work on and expand on. But yeah, I am thankful that we still, the few of us that do have it, have still kept that spirit that you guys brought about for us. And, you know, I just like to hope that, you know, in the years after I leave, maybe activism spreads out in the forms and it's not just an IB thing that like it is right now. And yeah, I think that's just all I have to say on how I wish things were. Thank you, Tamara.
Thank you so much, Liam. I see that my co-host Aye has managed to join us, so I'll give him the floor and I'll let him introduce himself.
Hi everyone, can you please just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me or if you can hear us? Okay. Everyone else is frozen for us.
We can hear you.
Okay, great. So joining in live from the Assembly Hall with some students behind me. Say hi everyone. Hi. Yes, we all wanted to be part of the conversation, so we are a full bunch here with full diversity of voices. So sorry we're late. We had some technical issues on this side, but we are still nonetheless excited to be a part of this conversation. So just to introduce myself, my name is Ayeyi Asamomeni. I'm in IB2 and I'm the head of Link Group and one of the organizers of this conversation. And so Tamara, if you could just fill me in on where exactly we are in the program. and then we could proceed from there. But so excited to meet everyone.
Thank you so much, Aye. I was just about to turn things over to Mandy and ask her whether Waterford has lived up to its legacy against apartheid.
My answer to that, Tamara, would be that Waterford has built on its legacy and built a very strong foundation for engagement with the social issues of the day. So although apartheid no longer exists in its formal form, of course, racism exists, and we've seen this with Black Lives Matter. And the conversation has also evolved to include issues like environmental protection, to include issues like gender protection, like diversity in many other senses. So I think Waterford has become a platform for a more global conversation, but also a more inclusive conversation about the fundamentals of human relationships, which is dignity and respect and worthiness for each other and for the environment. I believe it can evolve into much more if as Vanille said, you are more questioning and you are noticing of what is around you, but also what is missing. Let me give you an example. Today I looked at what are the sustainable development goals, because you would imagine that combating racial harm and racial inequity is a big part of our global agenda. It's not there. So the question would be, so who's setting those goals and why is it not there, and how do we address that? So I think that there is a lot more scope with Waterford as it is today to start to look at the more global issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mandy. Alana, do you feel like Waterford has lived up to its legacy against apartheid? And do you feel as though we're still doing something, or we're still trying to live up to the legacy?
Yeah, I thank you so much, Tamara. So I think that, the thing about white supremacy is that we're not going to see it end in any of our lifetimes. It's like we constantly have to do the work. We constantly have to be asking ourselves questions. And so I think, the answer to that question we should be always asking that question, right? And we should be always asking, right now it's 2021, how do the ideals of Waterford really translate to what's going on now in the world? And how, what are the ways that the students really can connect and kind of create what activism they want to engage in specifically? What are the critical issues to them? And Liam had said something before about a disconnect between IB and the rest of the school. And I didn't do IB. And I think that was, it always felt like IB was something separate, right? And that's where I think the UWC piece comes more into IB. And I think, making sure that there's a connection between those kind of global UWC ideals and the rest of the school is super important. I also think, I think now there's another UWC in Africa and Tanzania. Is that correct? What are the African UWCs doing to make sure that Africa is an important part of teaching other UWCs about what matters to Africans? Like, what responsibility is Waterford taking to make sure that that is kind of penetrated into the curricula that for IB? Like, what African knowledge and experience is being shared with the rest of the world, because you have a really unique advantage to do that. So I think it's constantly asking that question and really thinking through what are the ways that Africans can teach other people, because going kind of back to what Duma said, the whole notion of where knowledge comes from is often from the West, and where power comes from is often from the West. But what is Waterford doing to really make sure that you're teaching the world about Africa and Africans? I think that's a really important thing that Waterford can do for the UWC kind of collective, and to make sure that they're talking about race, to make sure that they're being critical about gender identity and sexuality. Those are two other things I didn't mention before. We never talked about that when I was at Waterford, which is, again, horrific. So I think it's kind of, what are you doing at Waterford to make sure that you are sharing knowledge with the rest of the world? Because Africans are, have immense knowledge and immense things to teach the entire world. And I think you can really play a critical role in that.
Thank you so much, Alana. I think one of the things you mentioned that stood out to me was us talking about the important things. And I love that we're in an environment where, like currently we're in an environment where a student is able to take the initiative to start a discussion group, or I guess an extracurricular activity that touches on these different problems that we face today, and I guess we may probably face in the future. So yeah, Duma, what do you think about Waterford's legacy against apartheid?
Okay, first thing I want to say is we went to Waterford because we didn't want to be in South Africa. Our parents sent us there. It was an alternative to apartheid South Africa. Now, when I was looking for schools in Johannesburg for my son, I went to the private schools in my area, and I didn't like what I saw. At one school, a Greek school called Saheti, I'll mention it, I took my kid 3 times there. And each time they introduced me to the albino kid and the Indian kid who would have been in his class. They were the only Black people who would have been in his class. And I thought it was absolutely horrific. I was traumatized by that experience. And they introduced me to the only Black teacher who taught isiZulu. And that is the type of environment that why I had to decide to I wanted my kids to go to Waterford. And then the sad thing about it is that we had to make a trade-off between academic excellence and what we felt was a safe and transformed space that was transformed in terms of gender and racial dynamics. And I felt really cheated that all those decades ago, when I went to Waterford, I didn't have to make those choices. But now, many years later, there is no transformation in South Africa. So please, Waterford must not mimic the South African private school. I think that's what maybe how you lost your way in the last few years, because you tried to mimic a South African private school. The second thing is that how can Waterford be in touch with the issues of the day? You would have seen in the last few months, since the beginning of the year, South African students and universities have been having demonstrations for free tertiary education. I was inspired by what happened in the US under Bernie, and it now come to South Africa over the past 5 years. Waterford students would have been engaged in my time with what is happening currently. And I've been engaged a lot with the students, costing issues of how much it will cost to have free tertiary education, because I believe that we have to take profit out of education and profit out of healthcare. And I actually have got an aversion towards private schooling, which is a bit of a contradiction because I went to a school like Waterford. And finally, Alana got me thinking. My eldest son, he grew up in Tanzania, and he came and took the test. His mother they'd never heard about Waterford, by the way. So then I told them about Waterford, and then suddenly they were interested. They live in Arusha in Tanzania. And then they quickly went and took the test in Nairobi, and he didn't make it. I tried to appeal to the school, he didn't make it, but he ended up at UWC in Wales. But the point of what I'm thinking about is that I think what is very important is this Pan-African identity that Alana was alluding to. You're a school that is rooted in Africa. Your Pan-African identity is what differentiates you from your Pan-African and international identity, differentiates you from the typical South African private school or the private schools elsewhere that people can go to. So those are the 3 things I'd like to talk about. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Duma. Daniela, what would you like to say about our legacy against apartheid?
My co-panelists have covered it all. The few things that I can add as just echo what Alana has said in terms of we definitely need to be demonstrating the role of Africa and what it means to be African and leadership in Africa in Waterford, as well as looking at its identity in the global aspect, as Mandy has pointed out, with the development goals. There are other tools, there are other global issues that are being raised, but we should approach them in terms of, from an African perspective. Not the translated African perspective, the African perspective in the sense that, for example, if you ask me about how we do things at home, I'd have to think about it in Siswati, translate it to English so that someone can understand. But let's stick the essence of like the first part of that equation of, in the African content, this is what it means, not in a digested content. Thank you, Tamara.
Thank you so much, Benedict. Liam, what would you like to say as a WKIB student, current IB student? What would you like to say about the legacy against apartheid?
I mean, I would rather, unfortunately, have to say that we're not doing the best job as students and as an institution to really live up to the legacy set for us by some of the alumni here today. I feel like racism has become almost a taboo subject at the school. Like, you can't really get any of the teachers to talk about it. Talking about it becomes very difficult. I'll give an example. Last year, when the George Floyd thing was very much in full flow, full effect, some of us students tried to get the school to make a statement about it, to talk about it, and to generally appreciate the fact that something like that has happened. But like, they were very reluctant to do it until like we put a lot of pressure on them and just decided, you know what, we'll do it ourselves. So that kind of, rejection of the roots, that kind of, not ignorance, but like the choice to ignore some of these things that are going on is kind of like a very poor reflection of, the school's history and the school attitude. Because like, if it was founded to talk about, or founded to, first of all, allow Black and white students and students of all races to coexist and to get the same fair education, I feel like in the modern day context, doing something like that, or like simply refusing to acknowledge such an issue, would be not really what we're about. Would be more like the private South African school Duma was alluding to earlier. I feel like there still needs to be a lot of effort that is happening both on the student front and on the faculty front as well, for us to have more conversations about these things, for us to be more aware about these things, because as it stands right now, we're kind of just, as a minority still, even though the majority of us in Waterford are still Black students, we're still as a minority trying to get these issues out there. And it's not just about racism, it's about gender-based violence, it's about a lot of things. I just get the feeling that like, we are taking the South African private school route. Don't talk about these things because it's not easy to talk about them. It's very difficult to talk about them. So we'd rather just not talk about them. So that kind of attitude that's being employed by faculty, by students, by people at the community in general does need to change. We do need to remember that this school was founded on fighting injustice, and we do need to kind of go back to that in recent years, especially. Thank you, Tamara.
Thank you so much, Liam. I guess what I've gathered is that we still have a lot of work to do, but with the type of energy and the type of effort we have put in over the years and the type of effort we're putting in right now, I think we're there. We're going there. We're getting there. Aye, would you like to lead us into the next discussion point?
Okay, first of all, thank you so much for the responses for the previous question. Very insightful, very detailed. Actually, just building up on that. So what I've gathered is that Waterford is almost losing the identity it had established itself previously when it first developed as Waterford. And in preparation for this panel, many of the discussion points that came in was, once we became a UWC school, once we became an IB school, many of those pivotal, many unique parts of our personality as a college have been dissolved and transformed into and lost through those avenues as a UWC and an IB school. So I wanted to find out from you guys, or from everyone in the panel, sorry, if rich that Waterford has almost been overtaken by its UWC identity. Has it been, in your opinion, do you feel that as a UWC or an IB school, Waterford is attempting to become too global in the sense that it's losing what the rich history it had before? So I just wanted to find out, maybe we can start with Mandy, particularly from what I hear of her position as being in the first class to have started IB. So what is your opinion on that, Mandy?
I'm not the first class to have started IB, but what I can say is, just listening to Liam, I hear something that sounds very familiar to me. And it may sound trite that the youth is always pushing forward the agenda that is important to them. That is the correct way society is structured, that we open up to the youth for their new agenda. It's a historical fact. So I would not read it as Waterford is failing or Waterford has lost its identity, much more as Waterford has kept enough of its identity to keep talking about these issues, as indeed it is today. However, could there be more that is done? I'm sure there is. And I think it's not so much as a loss of identity, but perhaps a blurring of priorities. And it is about shaping those priorities again into discussing what is most important to you, the people who were at Waterford. I don't know if that answers you well.
Yes, it does, Mandy, and apologies for the incorrect information previously. Maybe we can hear from Duma, then Alana as well for the same question about how our identity as Waterford, has it been affected by our newly accepted identity as a UWC and an IB school?
I'm sorry, Aye, before we continue, I'd just like to invite our virtual audience to type in some questions in the chat that you may have for our panelists.
Alana first.
Oh, me first? Oh, sorry. I thought I was waiting for someone else. So I think that the real question is more about leadership. I think the leadership of the school really sets the tone for what the school is involved in. So I think, UWC, I have friends who've gone to UWCs in other parts of the world, and I've heard a little bit of the conversation from people who went to Waterford as well about, UWC not really talking about race and not talking about white supremacy in the ways that they need to. But I think it kind of comes back to my point that I mentioned before. It's really, I think, leadership of the school, not just the principal or the headmaster. I don't know what the term, I can't remember what the term is that was used. I went to so many schools after Waterford, but the head of the school, it's not just the head of the school, but the teachers who are in the leadership positions in the school, and then all of the teachers really making sure that they are centering the things that are important to the school, which should obviously include the history. And I think, the first teachers that started and created the schools and the first group of leaders were very anti-apartheid. They created the school for that purpose, right? So what happens when those leaders leave and transition out, and how is that legacy transferred at the leadership level? And how is that kind of also how does that manifest in what is currently going on? And I think it's really, for me, I would say, I would, if I was a student, I'd put pressure on the leadership of the school to make sure that they're doing what you need them to do. And you've identified that this is something important to you. It's definitely important to me. I mean, it breaks my heart, Liam, to hear you say that teachers and teachers didn't want to talk about race, like what? And the school didn't want to make a statement about Black Lives Mattering. That's insane. That's so unacceptable. And I saw saw that Ashley Green Thompson said that also, you know, it's, I need to do more, basically. I feel I need to do more to make sure that as someone who really cares about the school, that I'm doing what I can to make sure that, you know, we're holding leadership accountable. So yeah, I think that leadership is just such a central part of making sure that it doesn't dissolve, and the legacy of Waterford doesn't dissolve and is not whitewashed. And, you know, the truth is, another thing I've spoken to friends about who went to Waterford is that, you know, in some ways being anti-apartheid, if you're like a progressive white person at the time, like that was, of course you're going to be anti-apartheid, you know what I mean? Of course you're going to be against the struggle, you know, globally, if, you know, so that was kind of something that, but like to be anti-racist, to fight white supremacy, that's going to make a lot of people uncomfortable. and so I think it's, you know, who are you hiring to teach the students? Who are you hiring to lead the school? You know, is there a student panel that is a part of that to make sure that you're hiring people who is reflective of your values and your ideals and the values of the school? So I'll stop there. Yeah.
Thanks, Alana. I think I'm next. You know, when you were talking, yes, the leadership sets the tone, but I was looking back to my time at Waterford. I can hardly remember who the principal was. And was it Jennings? Did he change while I was there? The point is, I remember the inspirational teachers who politicized me. I remember my friends there. I remember we became activists, irrespective of what the principal of the time said. And quite frankly, I don't think it was, yeah, anyway, so I think that's my point. But now in terms of the question that was asked by AA, I don't think the school can be too global. I think it must be more in touch with the issues of the day in Africa. What are the issues of the day where your African students are? What is the issues in Zimbabwe, in Swaziland, in South Africa, in our region? And how can you, as the school, get more engaged in terms of those issues? It might be just about having debates. I'm fascinated. I've been to Ethiopia a few times, and I've been following their so-called miracle in Ethiopia. There's a civil war in Ethiopia, and have a talk about what's happening in Ethiopia currently to engage the student body, and have a talk about what's happening in Zimbabwe currently, or even what's happening in Swaziland, or bring people to the school as to what's happening with the Fees Must Fall protests in South Africa, and what can you learn as the student body? Can you do assignments about the Fees Must Fall, about the free tertiary education movement in South Africa? And so within the UWC group, you are a school with an African identity, as opposed to the other schools which might have a Welsh identity or whatever identity. So I think that I think the two they don't have to be in competition with each other, because for me, when I was at Waterford, the international identity it became part of my identity. I became internationalist in outlook and African at the same time. Thank you.
Can I just say one thing in response, am I allowed to, can I just say one thing in response to Duma? I just wanted to say, you know, I love the idea of having people, you know, come and talk about topics and discussions and things that have to do with Africa. I'm actually seeing on this chat that there's two people I went to Waterford with. You know, one is Elsie Ayakuzi, and she just sent me a message. I heard her on BBC yesterday talking about COVID in Tanzania. You know, there's Mandu Reid, who's on this as well, who's the head of the Women's Equality Party in the UK. There's so many people who are alumni of Waterford who can be part of these conversations to kind of connect you to what's going on in different parts of Africa and like around the world. So I think I love that idea. And I just wanted to say that I'm sure there's alumni who'd be supportive of that.
All right, thank you, Alana. That is a good point, that we should definitely use the resource that we have with the alumni who've graduated. I mean, I think part of this is what we're doing, to hear from you as alumni and to sort of connect that to our experiences as students right now. I'm interested to hear the latest two alumni, or the latest alumni and the current students, Banele and Liam. If you think the identity of being a UWC and an IB school it's in contrast to WK's rich history that it had or previously established? Do you think they are almost arguing or keep trying to occupy space with each other?
Thanks, Aye. For me, I really would build on what Alana was talking about, that it's actually the leadership that really detects which parts are more important in terms of like the UWC values as opposed to the legacy of Waterford, the two tied in together. My experience as a student was completely different to my experience as a staff member at Waterford in terms of how we view these values and what was important when I was a student and what has changed. And I remember, just like Duma had said, that the teachers were great influencers. I remember the late Mrs. Enshaw, Margaret Dlamini, Mrs. Donko. They were really great inspiration, people who inspired us as students and were quite living a life of activism themselves, where we would see them actually standing out against something that is happening in terms of staff issues, and that way shining the light for us students. And in that way, we saw the legacy of activism and Waterford being different from what's happened when I was a staff member, where we were mimicking more of the South African schools, international schools, where we had started losing some of these values. And one thing that I can point out, for example, where we were starting to lose the roots of the school being in Africa was when I was a student, each and every assembly would sing the national anthem. But then when I came back as a staff member, that had disappeared. And I asked why was that? I never really got a good answer to that. It just really did show that there is a little bit of, when we focus more on global issues that are drawing us away from the place of where we are now losing touch to the consciousness of what is happening at present here and around us. And in that way, it actually is not a great way in terms of education, because we need to be inspiring students to be aware of what is happening around them. In that way, they can have an immediate impact. And from immediate impacts, that is where we build on a global impact. Thank you, Ayeyin.
Thank you, Vanele. Liam, what is your take on that?
Yeah, I think I'd just like to supplement a bit on what Vanele was saying. I found that national anthem example to be quite interesting, because I can almost relate it to something that's been happening with me or my year. I was here in 2015 as a Form 1, and they taught us Siswati for 2 years, Form 1 and Form 2. After that, you stop learning Siswati. I feel like part of the reason that the school may be losing their identity to the UWC organization, and in terms of focusing more on being a global thing rather than, a global thing that talks about African issues, is the curriculum that we're using is, let's be very honest, based on Western ideals. It's Westernly centralized. Because the idea is you're mostly being groomed to be an IB student at the school rather than you are to be a global citizen or to be someone that is talking about African issues. You're mostly being taught to be a global student, or taught to be like someone who's focusing on global issues. But like, I think Duma was the one who referred to it earlier, we still do need to be talking about African issues, which is just not happening as much as we'd like it to be. Because again, the Siswati example, you learn Siswati 2 years and then you do Form 3, and then they start westernizing your education, westernizing your UWC experience. You do IGCSE, which doesn't recognize Siswati as a language that you can take, and you do IB. So the vast majority of the time you spend at the school is still learning how to be a Western student rather than is learning how to be an African student who has, the intelligence to articulate about African issues. So I do think, yes, that, you know, part of becoming a UWC there means losing things like singing the national anthem, losing things like learning Siswati, losing things like the African identity, as much as it is educating us about global issues, about how to, you know, research and be confident in the things that we're talking about. So it is like a give and take situation where we are being given some kind of new intelligence on how to speak on these things. However, we are slowly beginning to lose the identity of being African and being like an African school at the root of things. Thank you, Tamara. And
Thank you so much. Also just we're running short on time. I was also just going to give my experiences very briefly. I personally joined Waterford last year when they were taking in the IB students. And I was very enthusiastic or very excited at the thought of learning Siswati, perhaps at Siswati beginner level, when I realized that was not an option because indeed what IB, the International Baccalaureate, did not offer that. But I just wanted to be the devil's advocate and argue because recently I think they pushed for Siswati higher level to be an IB subject, and in that and to allow students to take that as a subject. And so I think maybe if I can hear from Liam and perhaps Banele, would you not say in that case that something is being done, that this is a problem that has been recognized and there's a likelihood that we're probably going to have influenced the IB diploma in the future? So perhaps let's start with Liam. What are your thoughts?
I feel like that would be us becoming, you know, heroes, shall I say, of the alumni, really doing something to impact change. I feel like, however, the fact that, you know, to begin with, that we're in this situation is, you know, detrimental. That's a horrible thing to happen. But should the case be that people would be allowed to take HLC Swati as a result of student, you know, activism, that would be a great thing. That would be a great testament to what's happening. And it would restore some of, you know, the Africanity that is associated with Waterford. Like it would genuinely be a very good thing, and it would give you, I would say, the complete UWC experience. I'm ashamed to say I really have very limited knowledge of Siswati because we did 2 years and I really, you know, truthfully wasn't paying attention for most of the lessons or whatever. But like, you know, you do need that, you know, give or take that, like, if we are going to allow us to be in your global identity, allow us to bring some of us with you as well. And I think having high level Siswati recognized as an IB subject would definitely be, I've just seen Ms. Angoya said this year the IB has recognized Siswati as an HL language. That is, in my opinion, the hugest victory, a really big step forward. That's the way, you know, things should be. That's how we can progress. And that kind of thing, being allowed to bring, you know, your Africanity to the global stage should be what the UWC is all about. And yeah, I do think that will aid us going forward.
Just for me, I'll just add a few words. And I think my experience as a student, we really did leverage the student voice through the SRC. The SRC was a powerful tool that we used to actually voice and enforce change through voicing our issues to management. And I would like to urge even our current students to at least, maybe if we can go back and maybe our alums as well can help in sharing their voice also to the school in terms of what's the issues that they feel have changed, that needs to change, should be done. And that's all that I can share. Thanks, Tamara. I think we've lost a...
Oh, I believe I am back. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So I can hear the conversation naturally diverting into the role of students and how students can impact their education here and their experiences here in Waterford. And also, so it looks like it will be a good time to start diverting into student activism, was that a culture that was present in WK? So my question is, if we could, in your opinion, do you think that the culture of student activism was cultivated during your time at WK? And then to the question, I believe I'll ask two people and then also compare this with Liam's opinion. Do you think that idea of student activism is cultivated now? So maybe we could hear from Mandy and maybe Duma, and then compare that with Liam's response, seeing as we've got limited time here to go all around.
Thanks, let me start with student activism in my time. It certainly was, but it was also an environmental influence rather than a deliberate leadership choice at Waterford. And like you say, Liam, it was about the students agitating for what they wanted to hear and what they wanted to learn about. One thing that I see coming up in the chat as well that we haven't talked about today is some of the deliberate actions that were taken that nurtured us to be able to think about the further issues in the environment. And one of those was deliberately diminishing the impacts of class so that we all started off on a more or less equal footing. I remember loving wearing my just t-shirt and jeans every day because it meant that I did not have to have the latest fashion. I did not have to have the best of everything because I really didn't have that from home. So that very deliberate action to control the impacts of class on us was actually a nourishing action that helped us to think broader about broader issues. I myself came to Waterford on a bursary, and my other two siblings similarly came to Waterford on a bursary precisely because of that ethic of we shall have all of those who can contribute to the diversity of this world that we are creating. Thanks.
Thank you. Just before I answer the question, is that I've listened to Liam, I've actually changed my mind a little bit. Yeah, we have to decolonize this curriculum, and yeah, we have to engage with United World Colleges about changing this curriculum, because it's really sad that you're being trained to be another Western person, Western outlook. I feel very strongly against that. And then to answer the other question, Aya's question, is that you know, in our days, as Mandy said, it was kind of, the environment forced us. My friends were from political families, and there was no way I could avoid it, you know, because it was there all the time, it was staring us in the face. You go home, it's there. So it's a completely different environment. It was, there was no way that we couldn't be politically, whatever the principal or the teacher said, we had to be, although some of the teachers did influence us to adopt certain political. So I wouldn't like to think that it can be replicated today, but I'm not sure how it would happen in terms of encouraging student activism. But as I said earlier on, I think the students, there must be ways with the leadership that they can engage with the issues of the day in across our continent, internationally, and so forth, yeah. I'm not sure I can add much to this debate, but in our day, it definitely was, it wasn't like Alana's day. We talked about politics all the time. And my dad, I remember, he was fascinated about some of the essays that I wrote in history about the political situation. We didn't do, in my time, we didn't do South African history, which I really enjoyed. I had to teach myself South African history afterwards. And I felt unique about that I have to teach myself about that, but I learned about other history. But now when I look back, there was very little African history, and that is wrong. So those are the issues that we should be talking about. It starts with, as Liam made me think, we have to decolonize this curriculum and many other things that we have to do, yeah.
Sorry, Liam. As a current student perspective, do you think that is a culture that's being cultivated now in Waterford?
I would say, like maybe on a smaller scale, sorry, but it is technically the same kind of DNA. It is us students, people like you, me, and Tamara, who are seeing an issue that we need to talk about, that we need to discuss, that we need to really have brought to the fore. However, I would not be lying if I said that I would love to see it on a much broader scale, because as it stands, I'd say maybe it's about 20, 30 of us, maybe in terms of the entire school. who are really conscious about something to the point that we want to affect a change. And, having Waterford be like really supposed to be a haven of change and, social and political justice, I think we do need to see if we can do something to not incorporate only just the Black IB students and, just IB students in general. I do feel like it needs to kind of come down into the law forms, because personally, I'd be lying if I said that I was really interested in politics before maybe this time last year. I just, couldn't be bothered with that kind of thing. But like, I'm starting to open your eyes and see things like this, like see just generally injustice in the world, really allowed me to have like that kind of epiphany where it was like, I need to do something more. However, certain people just never do have that kind of epiphany. Certain people never come to that realization that these things are important. And I feel like the prioritization of other things in curriculum instead of like these social issues that we need to be talking about might be something that has to change in order for us to really have the same or some kind of heartbeat throughout the entire school in terms of student change and student activism. Thank you.
Thank you, Liam, and thank you, Mandy and Duma. That was, I've gotten a good picture of the progression of the cultivation of student activism. So currently, from what Liam is saying is, we are there, but we're not fully there. In the way that we are there only at the IB level, and that it's not transgressed and flowed into the lower forms. And so that's something we also have to consider. I think we are nearing the end, so maybe we should tackle questions. Tamara, would you like to go for the questions that if we have any in the chat?
It looks like we have more of comments than questions. I guess I'm just gonna read one out that really stood out to me. This comment is from Ashley Green Thompson. Activism doesn't have to lead you to the street or jail. It is about building and protecting institutions like WK and not allowing 50 years to pass before appointing a leader that isn't a male, white, or South African. The challenge is for current students and alumni to get more involved to hold the school accountable as an African and progressive institution. I think that spoke volumes, and I admire the fact that it spoke volumes during the discussion and not just as a comment after the discussion. But unfortunately, we have come to the end. Unfortunately, fortunately, depends on you, but to me, it's unfortunately, we have come to the end of our discussion today. I'd like to thank the link group heads, Aye. Some of the heads aren't here, so I'd like to thank Aye, Tanuba, and Beke for helping us organize this, along with the Black Consciousness Movement, a group that was created last year. I am the head of the Black Consciousness Movement, and I'm also accompanied by Liam, who helps me out with most of what we managed to do, including one of our workshops we had last year virtually during Africa Week. Aye, do you have anything else to say? Okay. Okay, Aye, are you there?
Yes, I am. Sorry, I dropped off. Okay. Sorry, Tamara, were you doing the closing remarks?
I handed it over to you, but yes, I was doing the closing remarks.
Okay. Okay, well, I personally was very excited to be here, despite the many times I dropped off. The students were also very excited. You may not have seen them. There's one right here, but they're currently not here because a number of them are practicing Ramadan. Many of them in solidarity with the Muslim students, so they're breaking their fasts now. But I have just been alerted to tell everyone, to thank everyone for coming, for having such an insightful conversation here, and for bringing such powerful points, and for sharing your experiences as WK students. Our intention as student organizers was to show how powerful our history was and still is, because to us as students, we realize that students often know, but they don't fully acknowledge, they're not fully cognizant of how powerful WK's history is. And so we just like to thank each and every one of the panelists for coming, and to thank the participants for the lovely remarks and conversations happening on the side as well. Oftentimes, it's not just the panelists that make a panel lively, it's the audience as well. And so thank you so much for everyone who came. So on behalf of Link Group, and to thank you, the principal, who also set some time aside from her busy schedule to really come and sit here. Thank you so much, Ms. Angoy. It's always a pleasure having you in our event. So thank you so much for being here. Otherwise, I think on behalf of Link Group and the remaining student body, I'd like to say thank you so much, and to have a great day and a great evening wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.